Hello and welcome to Education Elevated, a podcast from Avenues The World School in New York City. I'm Todd Shy and I'm your host. I'm head of school here at Avenues. It's my delight to welcome today Jenny Anderson, one of the co-authors of the new book, The Disengaged Teen, Helping Kids Learn Better, Feel Better, and Learn Better. Prior to focusing her attention on educational research, Jenny was a writer and reporter for a long time with the New York Times. Today's episode is a special first for us. We have a live audience in our Black Box studio, so welcome to all of you too, and maybe we can welcome Jenny with a warm round of applause. So it's nice to see you, Jenny.
It's good to be back. It's been a long time since I've been here at Avenues.
I was here in the early days when you visited us for the Times, so welcome back. You wrote a book about teenagers. Well, one thing that was on my mind is you said you interviewed a couple of hundred teenagers. I wondered if you were having flashbacks to being a teenager yourself.
Oh, writing the book?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was a long time ago, but yes, and it does. I think what it made me realize is how little my experience had in common with a lot of teenagers. There's some parallels, but it does feel to me that the world has changed so much, which attuned me to listening way more closely, because I do think the world is a lot different than it was. Learning is somewhat the same, but I did not, as my kids love to point out, have social media. I did not have the awareness of the world that I feel like a lot of teens have today. I did not have a pandemic that shaped that. So a lot of differences, but some similarities.
Your organizing idea is that teenagers lose interest in school very easily. When you talked to them, what did you hear them say about that?
They were very emphatic that school was boring, that they couldn't figure out why it was relevant to what was happening in the real world, that they wanted to be doing more things, not just sitting in chairs and learning. I mean, some of them had good experiences, and some of them, of course, it's definitely not all negative. But there was a real pervasive sense that who they were trying to be, those opportunities weren't being provided to them. They weren't getting to practice the things they wanted to be practicing.
Yeah.
Real decision-making, some real voice, some real choices in their lives. They were kind of shuffling through a system that wasn't seeing them and wasn't hearing them, and wasn't responsive to them, I think, was what I heard.
And you found that loosely teenagers fall into kind of four modes in school as a consequence of that. You have students who are in resistor mode, passenger mode, achiever mode, and explorer mode. Let's just talk through those quickly.
Sure.
Maybe say what you mean by resistor mode. What do those kids look like in that mode?
Sure. I want to caveat it by saying, so these are modes and not identities. These are not labels. They're not a way to pigeonhole kids. What we observed, and this was almost 3 years worth of research, and we followed hundreds of teens. We surveyed over 65,000 of them, and we noticed that they turn up to their learning in four ways. So resistor mode, as you started with, is everybody knows the resistor mode kids. These are the kids who withdraw and act out. They are often dubbed the problem children. They are, as we argue in the book, children with problems, and the challenge with them is really getting to the heart of what's trying to go on, because they are not acting in ways that are particularly constructive, but they are trying to communicate that something's not working for them. So that's resistor mode. Passenger mode are the kids who coast. They're doing the bare minimum. When you ask them how school was, they say boring or fine, and you say, what did you learn? Nothing. All day? Really? You didn't learn anything all day? They race through their homework. They're very eager to hang out with their friends, but they really don't, they're not invested. They're not digging in school. Right. Achiever mode are the kids who are aiming to get all the gold stars and everything that is put in front of them. And that's an important caveat, which I'm sure we'll come back to, which is they are very responsive to meeting the needs of a system. And they are great. They're developing great goal-setting skills, great organizational skills, really good work ethic and discipline, but they often become very fragile learners. And then explorer mode is you think achiever mode is sort of the top of the mountain, but it's explorer mode. Explorer mode is where kids really have deep intrinsic motivation. They are proactive in their learning. They're agentically engaged, which is a really wonky term, a really wonky way of saying they're willing to figure out who they are and how they learn, and then try to sort of bend the learning toward them rather than just complying and being passive for their learning.
Yeah. Why do you think, because I agree with you, that most people would by default think that achiever mode, you're firing on all cylinders, and that's kind of the highest mode to be in school. Achieve what's expected of you at a high level. And I think we probably think that because it sets you up to go on to the next thing and achieve at a high level and keeps you on a path of opportunities and open doors.
Yeah.
But you think it's risky to be in that mode.
Well, we're responding to the data. The data is really compelling. There are two kinds of achievers. There's happy achievers and unhappy achievers, and there's a very, very thin line between the two of them. So happy achievers are doing all those good things, setting goals, very organized, very disciplined, but a huge portion of achievers are unhappy achievers. They are striving for perfection and not excellence. There is no perfect, and so they are setting themselves up to fail. Every time they get anything less than a perfect score, they are devastated. They are unwilling to take any risks on behalf of their learning, so they're always going to write the paper that's going to guarantee them the A, and do everything just as they're told, but they're never asking themselves what they care about, and then they're never able to identify that, and that leaves them with a real fear and a real fragility. Yeah. And unfortunately, those kids do have the highest mental health challenges of all of the categories, even the resistors.
Wow. Yeah, I want to pick up on the fragility, because I'm going to quote from your book now. You say, teachers love them and encourage them, but they are often fragile. And then you also say, of the kids in achiever mode, they've got Waze, W-A-Z-E, the app, the navigation app. They've got Waze, and they are following it, rather than looking up or considering that there might be another way to get somewhere. And that really landed with me, because I think a traditional view of what a rigorous education looks like is very much like your head is down, surrounded by stacks of work and obligations, and you are just sort of plowing through what's expected of you. But this idea of looking up from Waze, or looking up from the app to see what possibilities are, that's really hard to do if you feel like in order to be rigorous, you've got to have your head down, surrounded by these tasks.
Yeah, and I think that's the false dichotomy, that sort of creativity or looking up or looking into yourself, that somehow that compromises rigor rather than reinforces it. Obviously, the person, when you fast forward this to a workplace, we were just discussing this with a parent here. When you fast forward to the workplace, of course you want people who can get things done, set goals, work on tasks, work in teams. You also want people who can solve problems on their own and who know how to be creative and do things a little bit differently and find new solutions to things. That is the definition of entrepreneurialism, right? I mean, finding new ways. It is clear that we have a few problems we need to solve in the world. We're going to need some new solutions, and that is going to require looking up every once in a while. And if you never get the chance to practice that as a teen, you can internalize the fact that it's just too risky, and so you don't do it. And then when setbacks come, which they inevitably do, you have very few resources to deploy towards that. That is the resilience challenge, right? Yeah. You haven't been tested, and so you don't have the kind of mettle. You haven't developed it.
Yeah. It's risky because in explorer mode, you're inevitably going to try things that you can't do, or that you're going to go down paths that you have to turn back from.
Yeah, I mean, the nature of explorer mode is to like try and fail and do again, right? I mean, there is an inevitable kind of inner strength that comes to, I'm not at the whims of the external environment. I have an internal compass, which is maybe just trying. It doesn't mean that you've got a passion or a thing, or you're the one teenager who suddenly figured out what they're going to do for the rest of their lives. It's really that willingness to try things and test things and know that that's okay, and that is actually part of the hugely important identity development process of being a teenager. You are trying on different outfits to figure out which one you want to wear in the real world. And if you never get to try on anything but that one outfit, that is what you feel like you can wear. I mean, that's a very sort of material example, but I kind of love this idea of like, you really are kind of testing different things out. And so you have to actually test things out.
And you might actually not be very good at or interested in something that you test out.
Absolutely.
We were talking, I mean, I think a fear that, or maybe an assumption that we want to have, that as long as you put in enough effort, if you stick with something and you allow yourself to struggle with it,
grit,
that you demonstrate grit, that you'll break through and achieve what you're trying to achieve. And that's just not true either.
Nope. No.
So part of maybe the fear embedded in explorer mode is, you actually might pursue something that's uninteresting to you or too hard for you or that you back away from?
Yeah, we were very intentional in the book to not use the term passion, find your purpose. Like, that is not, in our opinion, what teenagers are meant to be doing. They're meant to be developing interests. Find an interest, follow your spark, and yes, it will often change. For some kids, it doesn't. They know early, and it's great. I have one of these kids who kind of age 2, played Legos all the time, and now is very interested in design, and it all sort of makes sense. The other one, there's something new every day, and it probably would have panicked me now that she's 16 more before the book than it does now. Obviously I want her to dig in and figure some things out. Like, she has to stick with things. I don't need her to find her one true passion at 16.
I mean, that's helpful. And when our parents read your book, they're going to be encouraged to try to think of how do we create the conditions where explorer mode is possible for our kids. We want to do that as a school too. And I know sometimes in conversations with parents, we're talking about things that we're trying to create opportunities for students to explore and develop interests. Sometimes parents will say to me, but my child's not yet interested in something. What do I do if that's the case? Like, they don't know what they want to explore. What can we do?
Encourage them to keep trying. I mean, it's like, and don't panic. Like, they don't have to have it all figured out. I do think when we talk to teenagers, there was this overriding sense that they are meant to have everything figured out, sort of their path to getting into university, or what they're going to be after university or college, or what they're going to apply for. Like, that they don't need to know at 14. They don't need to know. So actually test things out. And it's okay if you don't like it, but you do have to stick with it for a while, because you're not going to enjoy things that you're super novice at. So you kind of have to dig in, give it a go, find some friends to do it with so it's a more pleasant experience, and see what happens. But I think it's us normalizing that that's an okay process. I think it's when we panic, they know we're panicking. They see our panic. They feel our panic. Even if we're like, it's totally fine. This is not a problem. Like, they know, right? They can read us.
Yeah. And parenting is such an art form, a difficult, beautiful art form, because you got to make the choice. Because sometimes you're going to say to a student, just stick with it. Like, don't give up on that yet. And sometimes you need to say it's okay to give up on that. You're just trying and exploring.
Yeah. I mean, there is clearly no right and wrong. It's sort of why we develop, I think a lot of people, especially when we go on sort of TV and we talk about the book, everyone's like, what's the one solution? We're like, these are humans. There is no one solution. It is the kids you have and the mode they're in and the moment of development they happen to be in. Like, it's what makes parenting so hard, right? You are constantly having to adapt to the kid changing themselves and sort of the environment that they're in. And it is trial and error. And I do think that that's part of the conversation we have with them. Like, I want you to stick with this because I think you might be good at it, or you might enjoy it, or you might find something here that you don't know. Would you be willing to try it a little bit longer versus I paid for this, just stick with it? The difference in that to a teenager is one shuts them down and one at least presents the possibility of continuing. So a lot of it is in the message and how we deliver it.
Yeah. Really hard work, parenting.
Very hard work. Very hard work. Very empathetic to that.
I wanted to stay with one more piece of Explorer mode, because you could hear Explorer mode and think that feels like a nice bonus mode to be in once you've settled all the your achievement goals, and that it's a way to find yourself and build a relationship to your own learning and your own journey. But they're good hard life skills that you're developing by being in that mode, and you're missing out on them if you don't enter into that mode.
Absolutely. I mean, so we describe, and maybe this will help frame it a little bit, we describe explorers as having agency, and we define agency as having the ability to set a goal that's meaningful for yourself and deploy the resources to get there. What that requires is the ability to know what the goal is. That is sort of that self-reflection and exploring, and a lot of experimentation and practice developing strategies that work and don't work so that you know the strategies that you need. Explorers actually perform better than achievers. So you don't sacrifice performance in the name of exploring because the internal motivation is there. So you're not constantly having to force yourself to do it. And so yeah, the kids who, there's 35 randomized control trials done in 14 countries over 22 years. by a number of academics, and kids who are agentically engaged in their learning, which is what we call explorer mode, because that's a horribly wonky term. Those kids perform better, feel better, and are more pro-social. So it is the trifecta. So exploring is not navel gazing. It is not choose your own adventure education. It is not like you don't need to learn chemistry because you don't like it. Like, it is none of those things. Rigor is very important in learning. Knowledge is very important. Curriculum is very important. Teachers, you all know this. This is an amazing school here. And kids need the chance to practice some autonomy, some real decision making, some authentic contributions in the world, and that's how they're going to figure out who they are. Those two things can coexist.
Yeah, and if you can convince everybody that colleges love that as much as we do, then that'll seal the deal for everybody.
Yeah, well, I mean, they can probably tell when your kid has found something that they really, really love, right? And if you were busy pushing them into chess club and they don't really like chess, but they could have gone into skateboarding and write the most brilliant essay ever about the sort of physics of a, hoop-de-doo flip something, it'll come off.
It's you tell the story of a student who went to Yale and kind of burnt out, or maybe burnout's the wrong word.
No, she totally burned out,
yeah.
I mean, it was a little stronger than that, but yeah, she had to take a year off.
Your description of her is that she was just in achiever mode her whole world, and then couldn't get out of that.
Yeah, she's the most brilliant, wonderful, effervescent, articulate young woman, and she just, her kind of high school resume, was kind of every parent's dream come true, let's be honest, right? Like, we kind of all want this for our kid, and yet when she got to Yale and things got a little bit hard, she had zero resources to deal with it. Yeah. She thought she was a failure. She didn't know how to ask for help. She thought if you asked for help, you were a failure, because she was always a success. Everything came easily for her. She was the Yale kid. Yeah. She was the smart kid. Smart kids don't struggle. She said this to me, smart kids don't struggle. And she said, I loved the praise of being the smart kid. I loved being praised. I love being praised by my teachers. I love being praised by my parents. Like, who doesn't love that? Yeah. But I didn't know how to handle anything but that. And so when she didn't tell anyone, and she sort of, she ended up having to take a semester off, and she did a job trying to set up a nonprofit. I kind of love this. And she said it was the most uncomfortable set of months, because no one was telling her exactly what to do. It was like, we need to set up a 501(c). She's like, how do you do it? Figure it out. She was like, how, right? And that, realizing there's a million ways to do things, and you can fall and get back up, she had to actually learn that and experience it. And she came back, changed her major, really dug in. She said, I don't have to graduate first in my class. I need to graduate knowing what I want to do in the world.
Is she graduated now? Do you know?
She's a senior.
Okay.
And she did change she was computer science, which she was doing because she thought she should.
Yeah.
And she's changed, and she's actually got an amazing internship. So
yeah, good.
she's still got her achiever tendencies.
But heartbreaking to encounter that. I mean, I know students like that who high achievers and go off, and the first time they encounter something that's it's an existential crisis.
Well, and I think when you get it, I'm old, really old, and I've been in a lot of different workplaces, and I can tell you there is just the level of burnout from people who have been on sort of, kind of A-type, ambition, achiever mode their whole lives, because they have been terrified to ask themselves what they really want. And so it's just a good skill to develop early on. Like, if we think about what the pain we could save by just sort of investing early. And again, this isn't like they come home at night, how do you feel internally today? Who do you want to be? Like, it's not that kind of, it's just every once in a while, like, oh, I noticed you really enjoyed that thing that isn't sort of college worthy. But like, I noticed that you enjoy playing bridge with your grandmother. How great is that? Like, that's really meaningful. Yeah. That is an achievement that's worthwhile. You're spending time with your grandma. It's reinforcing that, which is that deep mattering, that sense of mattering.
My favorite story, one of my favorite school stories, education stories, is the 19th century philosopher John Stuart Mill. His dad was a philosopher, and he trained him to be a prodigy. Mill was reading and translating Greek and Latin by the age of 8. He was doing geometry and math before he was 10, and he became a prodigy. And went off to college at the age of 12, and at the age of 18, he had a breakdown. And he was probably the smartest guy in England. And he had a breakdown, and he did recover and became a really influential philosopher. But he said, an unforgettable line in his autobiography, he said, I was a well-equipped ship with a rudder, but no sail. nothing was like, no wind to propel him forward, nothing to inspire him. He was just well equipped. I just loved that.
I love that image. Well, we played with the term navigator
Yeah,
for a while
for
instead of explorer, because a lot of
yeah.
people push back and said explorer sounds too navel-gazy. Like that's,
Yeah.
and we were very clear that that's not what it was. It was the opportunity
Yeah,
to
yeah.
be exploring yourself and the world, you know. But I really,
good,
I like
yeah.
that image.
Yeah. So my favorite thing about those 4 modes is after you've sort of laid them all out, you say, not only are they not categories that a person belongs to, they're modes they're in, but you also say you need to move between the modes. And so my question is, if explorer mode is kind of the highest mode to be in, why on earth or when is it good for an explorer mode to be in passenger mode or to be in achiever mode?
So I think what we would all hope for our kids, this is certainly what I hope for mine, is that my kids have the ability to see what mode the moment requires, because you are going to need all of these different modes, right? When you are working your tail off and you need to take a break, you got to go into passenger mode. You got to coast a little bit because you're going to burn out if you stay in achiever mode. It's final exams, you got to get into achiever mode, right? It is time to step it up and put in the work. Explorer mode, when an opportunity appears, when you've been doing something else, you know, you do need, and by the way, when something's wrong, when you see something wrong in your school, in your community, resistor mode, right?
Yeah.
Stand up and make sure it is known that something is not right, either for you, you've been bullied, something's happened to someone you've seen. You know, there is a place for all of them, and the sort of magic is helping kids build the self-awareness and the self-regulation to be able to deploy the mode for the moment, right? To know what I need rather than to just default to it. I'm in passenger mode and I don't know how to get out. I'm in achiever mode, I don't know how to get out. I'm resisting and I've developed, I mean, kids don't often, they'll never say it to you, but like you've defined yourself as a resistor. You're the rebel,
Yeah.
you know, you're the bad kid, you're the whatever.
Yeah.
They see no way out. We have to provide the way out.
Yeah.
And the way out is you can be all of these things. You've had your moment there, but there are lots of other things you can do. There are lots of other ways out, lots of ways of being in the world, always multiple pathways.
Yeah, I thought that was so reassuring when I read, because sometimes I think people can put pressure on themselves if you think that finding your interests or being in an explorer mode, that's where I need to be, and you're not always there. It can do the same thing that achiever mode does, which is you're putting pressure on yourself to achieve a certain kind of exploration.
I hadn't really thought about that, but yes, yeah, we don't want to put too much pressure on kids to be in explorer mode all the time. Just maybe celebrate it when it happens.
Right.
Provide lots of opportunities for it.
Right, to make sure it's happening, but it's okay to say, as you said, it's right now you need to buckle down and just achieve something.
Yeah, got to get to the finish line. That happens sometimes. Or it's
Yeah.
like we were having this discussion about a lot of young people in sort of their first jobs, like complaining that the job's not really interesting. And it's like, yeah, sometimes things aren't that interesting. You know, when my kids say, like, I don't want to have to study for this test, I'm like, I don't really want to go to work tomorrow morning either. Sometimes we got to do the things we got to do, you know?
Well, it's a good segue to one area I thought it would be interesting. I think we could get to some interesting places if I'm going to push just a little bit on the agency category. So I'm with you on this. Kids need agency. Let me read out a quote from the book. Kids want experiences and opportunities to contribute, to be social, and to solve problems. Instead, we ask them to study more so that we can rank and sort them. And where I want to nudge and see if we can get to an interesting tension is sometimes if you really want to be engaged in solving big problems, you do have to put in long study and acquisition of expertise and knowledge. That's part of and maybe our last conversation is actually helping me think about this, because it's like you have to bring a certain kind of disciplined study mode to your desire to be an agent in the world.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, this is the challenge. I think what we recognized, especially in talking to so many kids in passenger mode, was the parents were so frustrated because they weren't digging in, and they wanted them to get to that point that you're talking about. You're never going to become expert or good at anything if you don't dig in at all.
Right.
And so that's the tension. The challenge was they were pushing on them to do it, nagging them, sort of trying to control them because they didn't feel they had any other way. This is not, a malicious act. This is from a place of love and desperation.
Yeah.
So I get it, but it doesn't work. And so I think what we were trying to say is that doesn't work. If you're trying to get a kid motivated, you cannot make a kid be self-motivated. So the goal there, the irony of passenger mode is that sort of that requires a little bit more autonomy. But absolutely, to get to explorer mode, you do need to experiment, but you also have to, the reason we are so fixated on interests in this book and leaning into them is the process is you dig into an interest, you get better at it, you then want to dig in more, and then you get better at it, and then you learn. You have a muscle memory that is, I know how to get better at something, and that is something that operates in the background and can spill over to chemistry. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not like, oh, they've discovered, I don't know, crochet and now they're amazing at physics. It's not like that, right? That's not the way human development works. But for kids who are sometimes really stuck with their learning, they have to have that so they can dig in and build that expertise that you need. So it's like we can make kids just achieve in school, but then that's what they know how to do, and their feeling about learning is not a good one. We want them to achieve and to feel good about the process, and so that's what we're aiming for, right? And I think parents play a role in this. I think parents inadvertently often are sort of communicating either just get through it or, just you got to get to the top and then it's going to get better, and I think the journey matters. I do.
I think there's a really important, this is surfacing all kinds of, I think, pressing things for schools right now, because there was our kids coming out of the pandemic, I think, experienced, a generational hardship. And our mode, I can tell you here, our mode explicitly to each other was, let's take care of the kids. They're not okay, whatever they need to do. If we're on Zoom screens with them, if they want to turn their cameras off, they can turn their cameras off. They have to take care of themselves. When we were in school for a while, we were, extending to students everything that we thought would help their health and well-being. And I think it was hard to come back out of that mode. And I wonder for parents, too, of where we're so trying to take care of kids. And so we have, on the one hand, an important thing in our head is the well-being of our students. We love them, and we want them to be well and whole. And we want to instill agency in them and let them explore. And on the other hand, they need to become strong and resilient. And so they're going to have to encounter things that they don't want to do, and they're going to have to persist with things that they don't want to do. They're going to have to learn long stretches of expertise to build their capacity if they want to make a change. All those, so it's like the hard and the soft, and we want to hold those two.
So I think in COVID, we all learned the hard way. You have to be well to learn well, right? We recognized all the kids who were struggling really quite badly with mental health issues, and they could not participate in their learning. A lot of them, really, they were suffering. But the inverse of that statement is also true. You need to learn well to be well. Yeah. And so I think we can communicate to kids that rigor doesn't mean they're alone and doesn't mean it's do or die. Rigor means we're setting high expectations and we're right here for you. We're supporting you along the way. We're not going to abandon you, but you got to test your mettle. But we're here. Yeah. I just left for a long trip, and my daughter's taking mocks for a massive set of exams that you take when you're 16 in England. And I thought a lot about the note to write her, and the note I wrote to her said, I think you've got this. You've put in a lot of work. We're here for you, whatever happens, for the panic, for the triumph, for the setback. This is a practice. I love you. And that was that in my mind, in the back of my mind, I had rigor.
Yeah.
Nail it. You've got this. Go nail this, right? But if you don't, it's okay. We're still here.
Well, a perfect segue to, I told you I wanted you to read maybe my favorite passage from the book, and it builds on what you just said. So you're going to go to 252. If you get the book, or if you have the book, we're on page 252. Just read out that long.
Sure. It's so weird reading your own words. As in most things with parenting older kids, we're less directors and more advisors. We cannot bestow agency any more than we can pick our kids' interests or mold their personalities. As Alison Gopnik beautifully writes, we are gardeners, not carpenters. tending to the soil they grow in, not hammering away at the people they will become. They have to discover their agency and feel it for themselves. We scaffold the journey, offering ideas and discussion that stretch and inspire. We use autonomy-supportive language, help them find time to reflect, and we take their emotions seriously. We encourage them to struggle because that is the nexus of all rewarding things in life and the basis of resilience. We can do hard things because we have done hard things. We show them in a million ways how they matter beyond their achievements and help them find ways to belong through new interests and passing passions. We afford them the respect they so desperately crave, modeling through words and actions what it is to be a respectful and caring adult.
Thank you for that, Jenny. That's wonderful. I love that we show them in a million ways how they matter beyond their achievements. I think you should put your letter to your daughter in the paperback edition. They'll let you revise. No, what I loved about that, I said to you before, everybody who works with kids, whether you're a parent or a teacher, it's just deep emotional work. Your emotional investment in kids is constant. And when I read books sometimes about school and about teenagers, they just don't feel like they're emotionally alive. And so I love that your book does feel emotionally alive and attuned too, and that was one example of that. So
thank you.
for
Well,
that.
I do feel it is the hardest thing in the world and also the most important, so it's worth the effort.
Yeah. Well, we have an early custom on this podcast, which is to share stories about teachers. I think teachers are magical creatures. So I've invited you to tell the story of a teacher who was formative for you, maybe around the topic of your book, of somebody who helped get you engaged or interested.
I'm going to cheat and give you two answers.
Okay.
I had a high school teacher named Ann Green. She taught me AP U.S. history, and I grew up in a Ronald Reagan loving household in Chevy Chase, Maryland, and I had sort of known one world, and Ann was a professor at Georgetown, and I don't think she'd ever taught high school because she came in and basically treated us like college students, and I could feel it, and I loved it. She expected a lot of us. She got angry at us when we didn't think clearly and carefully, but like she hadn't been exposed to, like 16-year-olds aren't always the clearest thinkers, but she raised that bar, but she was supportive in her own not super warm and cuddly way. She was supportive, and we all wanted to nail that. We wanted to raise it, and she made me think different. She didn't indoctrinate me. She tested me. She had me interrogate my ideas in a way that was so exciting. Like I literally remember coming home and like yelling at my parents, did they know, like they hadn't been alive for the past 10 years, did you know that Richard Nixon wasn't the best president ever? You know, and just that kind of almost intoxicating feel of learning and feeling capable and pushed. So she's one. And then the second one is from college, and I bring it up because I went to Colorado College, which is a very unique kind of program. But in 1991, when I was a freshman, there was a recession. And I had an economics professor, Walt Hecox, and he trekked us off to our campus in Southern California. And he sat us all at this table, and we had kind of done the intro to macro and micro. And he said, the economy's in recession. I'd like you to solve it. And we were all like, does he not know we have no idea what we're doing? And there was a lot of discomfort, and within 2 hours, we were screaming at each other about monetary policy, fiscal policy, inflation, while we're looking up the terms. Like, no, that's what it means. Wait, is that what it means? Like, after a few days, we were so empowered to turn the economy around, which felt important because we were in a proper recession. And that, again, it was that sort of that drug of you can feel yourself building capacity. And that's, I think, what we all want for our kids. Of course, we want them to achieve. We live in a competitive world, but we want them to feel that thrill of learning. It's a drug, a good drug.
Yeah, those are wonderful stories. Thank you for sharing them. And Jenny, thank you for joining us. Jenny's book is The Disengaged Teen. You should all get one and copy of it and read it. Thank you for being with us. Thank you all for joining us. Join us next time on Education Elevated.
Thanks for having me.